Chapter 7 Dark Energy. It had been centuries since humanity had last bested someone this important to the Dark Universe. But this was no time for celebration. It was time to retreat, and a time to plan. The one demigod was now dead, but the fight was not over, and they all knew it. With the help of Zimi, Dabriana was able to subdue the inconsequential demigod rather quickly. Still, it hadn't mattered in the grand scheme. Remy had said a few things in his final moments. Some were perhaps lies, and until they could confirm them, they wouldn't know one way or the other. The one known truth of the matter was that they were all at the mercy of his father. Beneath the two otherworldly moons, a weighted silence clung to them all like a freshly knitted spider web. This silence wouldn't last long, however, and if they didn't act fast, that spider web would soon ensnare them, and ferocious spiders would quickly make their way to the feast. A series of dark beams began shooting up towards the sky as far as the eye could see. Leon didn't know what this meant, but Dabriana had. He swiftly moved to the gate, running around the carriage that had held Leon captive not long ago, slicing through it as he went. The carriage had only started to glow, but after being sliced in half, quietly dissipated into a small earnest smolder. "We should move. This may have delayed the dark gods, but I'm not sure if it will throw them off of us for long," Dabriana said, speaking to the group around him. "Come on now, you heard him. Let's get moving," Ragnar yelled in agreement so that Claven and the others further away could hear. Most didn't know what was happening, but it seemed evident to any of them that whatever was happening wasn't a good thing. They gathered past the gate in a group where Ragnar and Dabriana took the front. The middle was mixed with those freed from the carriage, along with the prisoners and inhabitants of the stronghold. A couple of strong resistance fighters were also in the center, pulling a wagon of the dead that still had their conquest mark intact, both of the resistance fighters and of the Snow Leopard's kingdom. Most of the resistance fighters that were alive had taken care to be in the rear guard. "Hope that's all," one of the resistance fighters said, speaking to Ragnar. Ragnar nodded. He understood the time constraints that prevented them from double-checking and being completely thorough, though he didn't like it. Leon counted that besides the dead, there were about 50 people in total that made up the midsection. He wondered just how many others had died in this battle to secure his safety and the safety of the few others that had made it out. This was the first time Leon had been outside since his capture, and it wasn't anything like he had expected. While the air held a sadness from those that were just lost, it was fresher and crisper than the dusty, burning mess they had just left behind. Leon did his best to ignore the sorrowful aspect, and chose to be thankful that he and so many others had made it out at all. Further along in the distance, there were hillsides in front of him, mountains to his right, and of course to his left the magnificent forest from which he came. "I don't like you, but I can't say I'm not at least somewhat pleased to see you," he thought, admiring the vast forest that had given him his first glimpse of death in this world. The forest was actually, for the most part, a pleasant sight this time around, given that he was not lost within its myriad, although the landscape was really astonishing, beautiful, and diverse. Further up ahead, there were more humans with the resistance. Where all of them had come from, he was unsure. "That doesn't look good," Leon said, watching in the distance where tall, dark cumulonimbus clouds began to gather as dark beams of energy continued to rise. "It's not good. Not good one bit," Claven said. This didn't help Leon feel any better, as he and others watched what he thought looked like a dark omen gathering in the distance. He had hoped that he was wrong. Part 2. As the group made it a few feet past the smoldering carriage outside the gate, Claven handed Raven back to the nurse. He then headed to the back behind the rear guard, and his coiled hair turned from a dark black to a deep white snowy color. The skin on his arms and neck frosted and converted to a cold, deep purple as he raised both hands and swiped in front of him, creating an X with his arms. He continued to hold this position with both arms stretched out, palms facing forward. Snow began to fall and pour down from the nearby mountains, pummeling the already broken stronghold. More and more snow piled on, while the vast amount of it was from the mountains. Some came falling chaotically from the sky. It seemed like a raging blizzard to everyone watching, but nothing was happening behind where Claven stood. Leon thought he had seen some real doozies as far as blizzards went from his days in upstate New York, but this took the cake. Perhaps this explains the snow that covered the ground near the coast when I first fell into this world. That would explain why things were so warm except at ground zero. The air itself nearby Leon, while a bit cooler, was nothing close to a blizzard-inducing temperature. Finally, with one last gesture of his hands, Claven pulled his arms back apart and settled them towards his sides. What was once a burning, dilapidated stronghold was now a giant, snow-covered tundra. The carriage and everything in that direction would surely be buried for a long time to come. Dabriana approached Claven and put his arms on his shoulder, looking at him in the eyes. I know that was hard for you. Those physical memories and pictures will be lost, but we carry them on. He carries on her legacy, Dabriana said, looking towards Raven. I must do what I can to make amends and protect us as we leave, Claven replied, with a sundered smile. They both retook their positions, and Claven grabbed his son once more. Let's move, Dabriana commanded. The group continued down a winding forward road as the dark beams continued to shine. The ones furthest away from them began to slowly dissipate, while more began to pop up closer to the group. What are they? Leon asked. He could tell many others had the same question on their minds. Dabriana looked over at him for a moment. The concern on his face was visible, but he decided it was probably best to let them know. This is what happens when dark gods die. In the Great War, it wasn't anything as spectacular or as grand as this, but with the new economy, things have changed. The land and objects that Remy had in his past bound to himself are beginning to fall from his claim. The further the binding was from him when he died, the quicker it dissipates and becomes unbound. This means where we are now will soon become unclaimed by any of the dark gods. It also means that the others know Remy has died. It means that those beams slowly become closer and closer until the last thing he was near that was bound to him shoots the final beam. I don't mean to alarm anyone, but really it is only a matter of time until the gods find out where he died. They will be torturing and killing whoever is good till they get to the bottom of this. That is why I destroyed the carriage. By destroying it, I also destroyed his zeal. If I had not done so, it would have given an almost exact location. This is why Zimmy had Remy before he completely died. If not, then the same sort of energy would have shooted up from him instantly, albeit more intense than what you're seeing now. So, is that why Claven buried the kingdom? Leon asked, somewhat understanding the concept of how things were playing out. That's correct. While it may not prevent it completely, it is our hope that it will at least slow down the process. We still haven't been able to find the markings or any indication of what allows them to bind, or just how they bind the kingdom or territory as their own. This is also one of the answers Remy refused to give me before you were brought over. The group, now unsettled, hurried along as the loud enigmatic noise of the beams continued to get louder, and therefore closer by the minute. They knew it was only a matter of time before it would be upon them. After traveling the path along the road, it had started to rain. The dirt had been damp before, but it began to become soft and muddy. They were directed to a nearby hillside that they needed to climb to make it to safety. The ground on the hill seemed even more unstable than that of the road. Most were having troubles climbing up, and for about every 2 feet they gained, they would lose another. Clavin was one of the exceptions, and he was practically walking straight up at record speed with his son in hand. He froze the ground below his feet, and like Velcro tape, he would peel one of his shoes from the surface, while the next would stay frozen in place, providing strong stability. The ice it left behind would pop as the rain hit it, just as if it was ice being put into a glass of water. Dabriana seemed to be having little trouble either, and where he stepped, the ground would become dry and flaky, as if the earth had seen a severe drought. This, of course, didn't last long, and the rain shortly filled it up, with the ground drinking every drop. Ragnar, on the other hand, just smiled. He was nearly lying on the ground and seemed to be enjoying the challenge of climbing up the muddy slope. "Is that all ye got?" he yelled while clawing his way up. Leon looked up in the distance and could tell that the beams were within only a few miles of them at this point, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. Only a few had made it up the hill by this point, while most were still struggling. "Come on, you got this," Leon told himself, a bit exhausted from everything he had been through recently. He had been luckier than most, and the shoes he had on were still the same from when he had gone to his grandparents' land. His hiking boots had materialized with him in this new strange world. Damn it! He fell face first into the mud, sliding a few feet back. "You alright, kid?" Vance asked, chuckling a bit behind Leon with the nurse on his shoulders. "Fantastic," he replied sarcastically. Even though things weren't smooth sailing, Leon was one of the first who had crested the hillside after the two alphas and Clavin. "Wow, well that's something I haven't seen," he said as he peered at the top of the hill. The view was astounding. In front of Leon, there was a giant field of flowers blowing in the wind. It was orchids mostly, but they were mixed in with a wide variety of primroses. The colors were some of the most stunning blues, whites, and oranges that Leon had ever seen. One color, in particular, caught his eye. It was a beautiful shade of peachy orange. If it wasn't for the background of thunderheads and eerie black beams, then this would have been a picture-perfect view. Looking closer, Leon could see that there was something odd about the flowers. Some were blowing away from him, others were blowing towards him, and even more were blowing in totally different directions. He looked closely, and there were a couple of points that this resonated from. There, the flowers didn't seem to be getting as wet as the rest as they blew more chaotically than those near him. "Let's go, lads. We ain't got all day, you hear?" Ragnar yelled down the hill. He pushed the button on his bracelet with the sun insignia that he had used to communicate earlier. This caused it to once again appear as solid orange, and then, a few seconds later, it returned to its solid black shading. What happened next was incredible. Something, or rather two somethings, began to shimmer from the point of interest of the strange airflow that Leon had just noticed. Two aircrafts appeared that looked like a mix between a B-2 stealth bomber and a V-22 Osprey. They had no propellers, but were instead elevated by a powerful yet quiet air propulsion system. While the stealth system itself was impressive, the most remarkable feature was just how silent they both were. Leon could hear no engines at all and just felt wind blowing. This made it impossible to really tell the difference between these two aircraft creating their own, albeit strong airflow, and a natural breeze. The back hatch of one of the aircraft opened and Ragnar went in. With an odd, almost black light radiating from the interior of the craft, you could see on the back of his cloak the etched design of a fading sun. Less than a minute later, he and another member from the Resistance returned with spare cloaks. The lady approached Leon and gave him one. He was also given a bracelet similar to the one which Ragnar was wearing. She told him to put them on and not to take them off until they were at Salutis. He didn't know what the meaning of this was, but he could tell there was some purpose for it. He thought it was better not to argue, but instead just abide in this case. The majority of the Resistance members were still helping others that needed help up the muddy terrain. There were a few that were focused on pulling up the wagon of their dead. Then there were those that had been weakened in prison on inadequate rations, and they were being carried by the stronger members of the Resistance. A few had made it up by now, and were given the same instructions as Leon was in regards to the cloak and bracelet. Clavin was given a set, and made sure his son was wrapped within one of the robes. Vance, Dane, and even Krista had surprisingly made it up as well. Each was given their own set, including the nurse who Vance had carried up. A powerful dark beam shot up screaming at them from nearby. This time, however, it was a bit different from the rest. It had white and red energies mixed in with the dark energy that was so prevalent in the others. It was close by in the directions from which they had come. Despite their best efforts, it seems the final seal had been broken. The dark beam blasted up from the snow leopard's kingdom. Part 3. Thunder continued to rumble throughout the sky, though it was unclear to them if it was from the storm itself or if it had something to do with those powerful beams of energy. Dabriana looked upon it, and a visible concern was on the general's face that seemed out of character to Leon.
Ragnar, take those who have made it up into one of the aircraft and set it to still. I don't know how long we have, but since not everyone is eaten, this could be catastrophic,
he told his fellow general. All but the final beam that was coming from the snow leopard's kingdom had vanished from the skies. Ragnar led Leon, Clavin, and all the others who had made it up onto the aircraft from which he had gotten the cloaks. Other than Dabriana and the woman who had been handing out the cloaks, only those still climbing and helping remained outside, which was still a little more than half of the group. After everyone who had made it up was inside, the aircraft door made a quiet sound as it closed tightly behind them, sealing them in. The inside of the aircraft was much bigger and spacious than one might assume from the outside.
"Sit anywhere you like,"
Ragnar directed them.
"Just try not to move around too much. Things will soon be translucent."
Translucent? Leon didn't understand what he meant. Then again, he didn't understand or know what to expect from a lot that was happening. He sat in one of the side chairs while he pondered and waited to see what would happen next. This chair is actually comfortable, he thought as soon as he sat down. It was a strange thought to have, but given he hadn't been anywhere comfortable since he was here, he didn't feel too terrible for thinking of it. There were seated rows on each side of the plane, like in a traditional military aircraft. There were also other seats in the center, like a civilian plane. After everyone had taken their seat, the lights dimmed, and Ragnar approached the helm of the aircraft.
"Have you connected to my fragment?"
Ragnar asked. He waited with no response.
"Damn it, Hope! Answer!"
After a moment, a voice greeted him.
"You know that is improper etiquette, General Lodbrok," a sweet voice replied. Somehow, it reminded Leon of one of the librarians from where he would go to the library at his college. Not exactly the same, but a similar tone nonetheless. I don't have time for your damn routines, Hope. Connect to my fragment and be done with it. Begin stealth immediately with the crystalline phase so I can see what's going on out there. Then start scanning for other energies, Ragnar said. He was vividly irritated by the response he had gotten from the hidden woman. Overhead, little lights in the interior began to flicker and sparkle before they began gathering near Ragnar. The next thing Leon saw, to his surprise, was a woman who appeared next to him out of nowhere. She did indeed look like a librarian, that, or perhaps an intelligence officer, was more appropriate. She adjusted her glasses before looking at Ragnar with a visibly angry face herself, as if to let him know the feeling was mutual. I've already cloaked the SFT, however, due to the influx of dark energy around us, my scanners, while already active, will have a hard time picking up any additional signals further out. As for your bracelet, I have already scanned it and connected to its fragment, thus verifying your identity, though I would appreciate it if you'd be more polite about it. After a brief pause, Ragnar finally said to her in a slightly less irate voice, Would you please initiate the translucent phase? It would be my pleasure, she said. Everything in the inner compartment of the aircraft, except for the seats and floor, became clear and translucent. It reminded Leon of the impervious metal that he had first walked through, but this was much more transparent, as if the aircraft was not there at all. The sound from the outside became clear. They could hear everything that was going on, including the pitter-patter of rain on the roof of the SFT. What's an SFT, and who are you? Leon asked the woman curiously after her sudden appearance out of the blue. Hope gently laughed at him as she made her way towards him. Her heels clicked across the metal floor with every step. After finally getting to where he was, she looked at him for a moment before deciding to answer him. SFT stands for Stealth Fighter Transport. As to who I am, well, my name is Hope. I'm an artificial intelligence program that was created to help protect humanity. My name actually means Humans Omniscient Protection Executive, or HOPE. Leon was shocked. The technology here was actually much far superior to Earth's, which could be explained by the shared knowledge of the greatest scientific minds working together. Leon wasn't alone in his amazement. Many of the others had also seemed impressed with the aircraft and the AI. Most of these people were probably about as new to this place as he was. Furthermore, when you considered the technology of the Snow Leopard's kingdom, the surprise of those that had been here much longer also made sense. Leon visibly had a lot of questions and a lot on his mind, but was unsure where to begin. Take your time, she said before she made her way back over to Ragnar, who was looking at the dash at the helm. Outside, many were still struggling to get up the hillside. It was at this time that Dabriana had decided to take drastic measures. Move! He yelled, having everyone move to the side and brought out his sword. Hopefully this doesn't bring unwanted attention, but they have no choice. After everyone was out of the way and at a safe distance, he sliced his sword in front of him, scorching the ground, causing a flash burn. The powerful flame swept down the hill, firing the clay-ridden soil from the summit to the base. This, in turn, created a hard, dry surface for those who were struggling to proceed up with minimal effort. It was of course still hot, but the rain was now rapidly pelting it and cooling it down and removing what little flames were surprisingly left over. Dabriana headed towards the group atop to help them once they reached the top of the hill. The clouds continued to rumble. Everyone was now making it up rather quickly and were given a cloak and bracelet before being loaded into the other SFT. There's been a distinct spike in energy nearby, Ragnar, Hope said, alerting him. Could it be one of the final beams giving one last burst of energy before extinguishing? That's very doubtful, sir, she said, looking around in the air in different directions. Wait, there's more than one. There are 2. No, make that 3. I'm detecting 3 distinctly different energy signals, sir, besides that of the beam. Hang on. According to my senses, there... Mid-sentence, there were rumbles in the atmosphere, followed by 3 distinct booms from outside that sounded like lightning strikes. Right on top of us, Hope finished. Outside, there were 2 craters that had appeared nearby. Mud had flown everywhere, briefly obscuring the vision of everyone who was trying to peer into them to try and figure out what it was. One crater was positioned between the other aircraft and Dabriana. In contrast, the other had appeared at the edge of the hill. Shortly after the booms, screaming could be heard further down the hill. The sound of one man could be heard in the distance, barely audible. No, please don't, he said before he said nothing more. There were a lot of blasts that followed. As for the craters in front of them, Leon could see nothing. He looked around, trying to see anything, but the rain had become very heavy and difficult to see through. Let me out, Hope, Ragnar said, moving towards the back of the aircraft. You know I can't do that. If I open up the hatch, then saving all of these lives aboard this SFT go from about an 80% chance down to 5 at best. You would need the authorization of at least 2 other generals to override this protocol. Get me a line to HQ now. Part 4. As Dabriana drew his sword, the look of worry could be seen encompassing his face from the SFT while the screams continued to roar. From within the other aircraft, war cries were heard. Even more high-frequency blasts, similar to those that were coming from down the hill, came from within the other SFT. Dabriana was stuck deciding between the 2 sounds of distress, and finally decided to head towards the aircraft, where he could at least try to protect it. He was just about to board the aircraft's ramp when he was quickly forced to jump back. Something had thrown a 3-pronged hook chain at him from atop of the SFT. It was at least twice the size of a tank chain and thrown by an odd-looking creature. While it had missed him, it skewered the woman that had given Leon a cloak and a couple of others that had yet to get onto the SFT. The creature had big pointed ears that were about the length of a normal man's forearm. They were also about as wide as a thigh. It was very hairy and had an incommensurable nose that looked almost coral. The nose was pointed and contorted in such a way that wasn't equilateral at all. Its eyes were dark and beady. The creature had giant devilish-looking wings that were attached to its big forearms. It looked like a mix between a bat and gorilla. Its stature resembled the latter. It was looking right at Dabriana, waving one of its sleek twisted fingers back and forth as if to say, "You're not allowed." It pulled its chain back, ripping the 3 apart that it had pierced seconds earlier. Their bodies and organs flung everywhere in front of Dabriana and towards the SFT. The other transport is lost, sir, Hope told Ragnar. Hope, what do you mean lost? Bring up the image. She held her hand out open, and it brought up a 3D image of the inside of an SFT that looked like the one that Leon was in now. In it, there were dead bodies. Mutilated, defiled, dead bodies. Blood and guts were splattered across the interior, and some of the 3D images presented were red from the blood being flung way up across the image-capturing devices. The few resistance fighters that remained alive inside were towards the helm. They were continuing to protect a small group of ex-prisoners. The group was seen to be shooting high-tech weapons that were responsible for emitting the high-frequency sound that everyone had heard. The blasts of energy were flying at a hideous creature. This thing, whatever it was, looked like a shadow. It appeared one moment and then vanished into the shadows of the ship. By doing this, it was able to dodge all the beams of energy thrown at it. It had no eyes and no features really that could be completely deciphered. It was as if someone started to draw a person and forgot to bring their features out beyond a small outline. One of the cloaked individuals was hiding on the side behind a chair, and after the creature passed by, they tried to tackle it. Her body just vanished within it. The shadow, whose face had no features before, now looked like a contorted version of the woman who had just jumped at it. The face's eyes were getting wide and struggling like she was being asphyxiated. A few seconds later, the shadow expanded and blood shot out in every direction, and then the shadow normalized. The woman's face vanished, and her cold, soulless body fell from within it. "What the hell is that?" Ragnar asked Hope, unsure of what the creature was. Hope stopped projecting the image right after the shadow creature reached the helm of the other SFT. The screams and fighting from inside the aircraft had finally ended as the shadow consumed every last soul aboard. "I'm not sure, sir. Whatever it isn't in my database," Hope responded. A final cry of agony came from the side of the hill as one of the men that were pulling the carts of the dead raced up the hillside alone. The terror on his face seemed etched in and unwavering. Dabriana started to head that way until he saw a hand grab the man's shoulder. The man tried to pry it off, but was unable to do so, and seconds later, a hand penetrated the man's abdomen. He let out a terrible scream as his whole body radiated white light. Only silence and small drops of blood befell the field of flowers as the cloaked man's body fell limp. His right arm hung over the hill crest, revealing that his conquest rank was gone. The man's eyes had been burned from his skull in an instant. The final being appeared from the hardened trail from behind.
"That's a shame,"
a voice said while moving forward from the crest of the hill.
"That's why you have to remove the eyes first, or they'll just all be wasted like so."
The being that crested the hill was tossing up 5 round eyes, all different shades and colors in its hand. Upon first glance, it looked a lot more human than the shadow creature and the gorilla bat that was close by. As it got closer, Leon could tell while its body was very similar to that of a human, there were very stark differences in its face. Its face was round, a bit oval like you would expect from a human's face. Its eyes were in the usual spots as well, yet its face was caved in the center like it had been hit by a baseball bat one too many times. It didn't have any clothes on, so all of its features could be seen by everyone. It was very pale and quite slender, yet it was cut, and its muscles were very prominent. The strangest thing was its hair. There was none anywhere. Not as if it was shaved, but as if none had ever begun to grow in the first place. It tossed one of the eyeballs high in the air like candy, and its face was pelted by the storm as it looked up. Its face split open at the center of its nose for a moment, and then collapsed upon the eye. The inside was only seen for a moment, but there were layers upon layers of small, razor-sharp teeth, which caused the eye to pop. Leon saw both halves of its face moving up and down in different directions, grinding it down rather than chewing. It did that with 2 more at the same time. Each eye popped as they were crushed inside the creature's face. It opened up once more, just enough to do a quick suction of air to allow it to swallow them. It stopped in front of Dabriana, only about 8 feet away, and smirked. Or was it frowning? Leon couldn't tell one way or the other with its weird ornated features.
"Well, look what we have here. If it isn't my old friend Damiana, it's been what? What? Maybe 2 years?
The flat-faced being asked, as he hooked the remaining 2 eyeballs through fishhook-like earrings that he wore. Its mouth didn't open, and its voice was a little nasally as it spoke through its nose.
I think it's been more than a few hundred of those human years since they've been defeated.
The gorilla bat interjected with a deep yet screeching voice.
Over 100 years? I guess you're right. These humans' lifespans are so limited and inconsequential. The time seems so vast to them. I just consumed 13 souls down the hill. While it gave me much pleasure, you have to ask yourself, what was the purpose of their existence?
Food!
The shadow creature moaned.
I guess you're right. That is about the purpose of a human. The purpose of all things in the Hydronic universe, really. They are our food. They are inconsequential. They have no destiny other than to become our food or anything else we desire. Back to the matter at hand. I'm assuming it was you who did away with our disgusting half-brother, wasn't it? Not that any of us here care, really. Truth be told, the only reason we came here is to split up the territory. His was a small, insignificant coastal region, but we 3 have claims since it borders ours. Well, 2 really, since we managed your brother's land since he really isn't one to think that much past his next meal. We also have to rid it of any disobedient humans that would cause us further trouble in the future. It seems the rumors about you may have turned out to be at least somewhat true. The general of the resistance? I mean, we'll find out more as that's the only reason you're alive. But it seems that you, Dabriana, that you and your humans have been quite busy lately. For example, I didn't even notice those of you wearing those black cloaks until I saw them in front of me. We only detected about 10 souls before we landed.
Yes, it was about 10 that we detected, which were of no great significance. We only came because of our glutinous brother there, and a sudden strong flame within the storm which caught our eye.
The gorilla bat said, directing his look towards the shadow.
Food!
The shadow moaned again.
Is this ain't no good? Or perhaps just one we haven't seen before?
Dabriana thought to himself while looking at the shadow.
Yes, quite down you. You can wait to eat more souls. You just had plenty.
The shadow looked a bit depressed from that statement, at least, as much as a featureless shadow could look.
As I was saying, there are just so many of you down here, including you, who, if I didn't see you now in front of me, I wouldn't have even known you were here. But I did think that flame looked a bit familiar. What's more, there's a levitating transport here. Where are you storing them? How did you humans build such a thing under our constant observation? Then, there are the questions of these energy weapons.
He pointed towards a gun-like weapon that was strapped around the dead resistance fighter.
While they may not have had much of an impact on us, they could have surely done significant damage to our guardians. There are just so many questions. That reminds me, where is our brother's body hidden?
Dabriana looked at him and then around, trying to contemplate a strategy against the 3 gods alone.
Perhaps should have had Ragnar stay out. Perhaps. Between myself, Ragnar, and Zemi, with the others providing support, maybe there would have been at least some hope of defeating these every year.
He knew Ragnar was probably inside asking for hope to open up this very moment. He also knew she wouldn't allow them to open the hatch without one of the other generals' approval to form a majority, and that was very unlikely. As it was now, it would be very challenging for even him, with the ace up his sleeve, or rather dragon around his neck, to escape these three. He had seen at least one of these beings, the flat-faced god, in the Great War before. He knew how ruthless of a fighter he was, and had seen him defeat many humans and even a few of their own gods. In the distance, the final beam began to wane. The intense dark energy faded until it was no more. Dabriana knew he couldn't take these three on alone, no matter how much he tried. With the intense energy now dissipated completely, he knew there was at least a chance to make something happen. He brought his hand up to his forehead and began to rub it. His nose hit the sun, and it turned bright orange before he spoke softly into it.
Ragnar, I'll stall them as long as I can. We both know there's little chance I can beat the three, even with the Zimi. It's up to you to make something happen.
What was that?
The flat-faced being asked.
It's nothing. It's just that you three have really pissed me off, taking lives that don't belong to you for your own satisfaction on the list. I guess it's about time someone teaches you a little something called the consequences of your actions.
His face and posture became serious, and he drew his sword. Steam began to rise around both him and his sword as the rain continued to fall. The bright blue flame appeared to encompass his sword once more. The three gods just smiled with intrigue, ready for what was to come next. Part 5. Ragnar looked anxious, as the comms between him and Dabriana had died. Hope, we have to act fast. Can you still fly the other SFT, and are its weapons functional? While the interior is a bit damaged, the overall functionality of the craft is still intact. This includes the weapons, shields, engines, and propulsion systems. Why do you ask? Well, I know you will not allow me to use this craft, or open the hatch to go help. There should be no issue with you using the craft to lure at least one of those creatures away, or to attack them, correct? I'm not sure how effective it would be in combat against these gods, but yes, my other fragment can pilot it, to at least distract or provide a semblance of cover for Dabriana. Okay, good. I want you to project yourself wearing a soul cloak inside that SFT, then start flying that craft so that they believe there to be at least one soul aboard it. Hopefully, this will cause at least one of them to chase it. Just keep them distracted and at bay. Put the full power in the SFT's defenses and engines for speed and maneuverability. There should be no problem keeping them just out of reach of it based on the speed of the SFT. Whatever is left, transfer to the weapons and fire accordingly. Understood? Understood. Though, even if we manage to draw out one of those three, the chances of Dabriana making it out aren't guaranteed. Even with Zimmy, he's going against Flatface, who, I'm sure you know, has killed many alphas before. Not to mention, my fragment won't be able to do much to help him, since we're out of the energy radius of Salutis. He used most of his stored power earlier fighting Remy. I know, that is why I need you to patch me through to command now. I assume with the beams gone, all the interference should be halted also, correct? I'm already in the process of synchronizing. One moment. And done. It seems that won't be necessary. My mainframe in Salutis already received our distress, as we tried to send it earlier, and my fragment had already forwarded to those at HQ. They are connecting now. A projection separate from Hope began to gather towards the back of the aircraft. A lady with a milk chocolate skin tone appeared from nowhere. Her hair was in a beehive weave and had attractive features from her perfect complexion to the piercing brown color of her eyes. The only odd thing about her was a boa constrictor that she had hanging from her neck.
Just what's happening there? We've been round here waiting for news of your mission. Can you explain what's going on?
The woman asked in a thick New Orleans accent.
Well, we're in a bad spot, Marie. Things have gotten much more complicated than we originally anticipated, and we ended up liberating the village instead of a simple extraction.
What do you mean you liberated the village? You were supposed to just rescue him or buy him, whoever had captured him.
Look, I know it's complicated and completely different from what we discussed, but he attracted the eye of Remy, so we had to improvise. Anyway, we don't have time for that. We ended up killing Remy and now Flatface and some shadow god that I've never even seen before, and that gorilla bat fucker are all out there together with Dabriana. You had me come in this SFT with half the group as the beams were closing in on us, and conditions were difficult for everyone to board quickly. Of course I agreed so that I could protect the objective and have the population that survived the previous fight. The only problem is that he's stuck out there now with no backup. Everyone else that you don't see here is dead.
Marie waited a moment, looking around at the ragtag group of individuals, a few guards from the camp, a couple prisoners here and there, and other civilians. There were only a few resistance fighters mixed in compared to what they had come with. She didn't seem happy at all with what she was seeing.
Well, do you have a plan or not? You know much as I that we can't afford to lose Dabriana, so what's she gonna do?
I've come up with a plan with hope that can effectively distract one, maybe two if we're lucky. Past that, I think it would be best if we override Hope's protocols. With one or two out of the way, surely we could.
I advise against that action. It's true, we could distract up to two of the gods. I think the probability of the aircraft to keep them occupied long enough for this group to take that flat face down and flee is slim at best. I also think that the probability of them able to fight and protect all the lower conquest users and the SFT in the process is only slightly higher. I would give them about a 30% chance, even with Zemi's help, and Clavin on the defense for everyone on this aircraft to live through the conflict at this range.
Is there really nothing we can do?
Clavin asked while looking at her strangely, then back outside towards his old friend and mentor. He didn't know how she knew of him, but seeing how they had intel from even some of the gods in the Great War, he guessed they had files on known humans as well.
Likewise,
she continued, ignoring Clavin,
if you were thinking of flying this aircraft to a safe distance and then exiting back and providing support, there is a 95% chance, according to all data calculations and including unknown variables of the shadow, that the other two would have grounded the other SFT, learned it was a ruse, and been back before you even made it there. This would provide to be no better and potentially worse than the current situation. That's not even taking into account unknown variables such as the Dark Creator. With the death of one of his sons, it is likely for the Dark Creator to make an appearance soon. This is not something I can account for, but that could happen any time. Taking those unknown factors into account, there would be a high probability of losing both Dabriana and you yourself, Ragnar, to these three gods.
Ragnar wasn't having it.
I don't give a damn what your statistics say, Hope. We can do this. What other option do we have? Abandon Dabriana?
Essentially, yes. If we succeed in distracting the Shadow and Gorilla Bat, we essentially give Dabriana an escape route. All previous war files, encounters, and sightings from the Resistance suggest that Flatface cannot fly. It seems likely that he was flying with the help of one of the others. Thus, if we distract the two with the flying capabilities and lead them in the opposite direction, As long as Dabriana has his cloak, his soul will not be able to be detected, and Zimmy is a semi-immortal being with no soul of his own. Thus, with the cloud cover, there is an 80% chance of escape. While not ideal, I do think this is the best course of action. Anything more could escalate this to the point of full-blown war, outside of Resistance territory, which is something that we are not ready for. You know as much as I that it would turn out to be catastrophic for humanity as a whole. You said you could get the intention of one, maybe two. Now you're saying you'll be able to get both, Hope? I believe so. While it's not guaranteed, it is highly likely, and it is the only outcome that gives everyone here a high chance of survival.
The logistics and what she just said didn't help to comfort him at all. Marie, on the other hand, seemed more collected and pragmatic about the situation. She was talking to someone else on the side, and they had come to a decision.
Is as Hope say, we do this here and hope for the best. That's the decision we've agreed to here,
Marie said, knowing Ragnar would likely be upset.
Odin's sake, if that's really all you have decided, then fine. I can see where you're coming from, but fuck all if I don't agree with it, Ragnar said as he moved towards the helm and took a seat.
Marie nodded, and she and the projection vanished from the back of the craft. Leon and the rest of the group sat there quietly, still just watching outside as Ragnar began to speak into his comm bracelet to alert Dabriana to his plan ahead.
Dabriana, when you see the opening we're going to provide, then you need to escape with Zimmy as fast as you can. This is what was decided by the others. As much as I hate it, I'm sure you understand as much as I do.
He paused with a solemn expression on his face.
Just don't die on us.
Part 6. Shortly after the conversation took place, the three gods had gotten closer to Dabriana, encompassing him. The shadow blasted Dabriana a few times. He ended up avoiding most of them or deflecting the blasts with his sword, but one grazed his wrist, which ended up destroying his bracelet. As he was now left with no way to further communicate, all he could do was to trust what Ragnar had said and to have faith that they would come through. Just then, a voice was heard from within the bloodied SFT, panting and screaming.
You'll pay for this!
The voice of a sweet girl said from within the SFT as the shields turned on with max power. Dabriana and all three gods looked over to see a girl in a blood-soaked cloak dash to get into the pilot's seat. The aircraft's thrusters kicked into gear as the aircraft started to move off the ground slowly. The engines of the aircraft blew a lot of warm air back at the group as it began to rise further from the bloody drenched field of flowers. At the same time, the other SFT, unbeknownst to the three gods, had simultaneously lifted off, and they started to fly in opposite directions. The shadow was the first to chase the decoy SFT as it roared, "Fool!" The gorilla bat seemed to be keener on staying with Dabriana, which would cause the plan to fail.
You don't think it's worth your time to pay attention to me, is that it?
Hope said as she charged the ion beam that was on the SFT and targeted the animal-like god. The SFT shot the gorilla bat at full power, sending it flying past Flatface and tumbling down the hill. Its body was forced through the trees and corpses until it hit the base of the hill. All that came from the bottom of the hill was a screeching yell as it flew upwards at high speeds, chasing the SFT down in a rage. As the aircrafts headed in opposite directions of one another, Leon was unsure of how this might play out. He was curious to just how fast these gods could be and pondered for a moment before standing up and heading towards Hope. The translucent imagery was turned off after they began to take off from the field, so he wasn't able to even guess how fast they might be going.
Say, Hope, do you think they will be able to catch the other SFT anytime soon? Just how fast are they compared to the speed of the SFT? That's an interesting question. The gods that we have records of are fast, but they're not so fast that the SFT can't outpace them if it wanted to. It could leave them behind without hesitation. Of course, they do not know this, and that's how we want to keep it. The gods whose speeds we know of are estimated to be capable of being able to fly at a fair rate of around 3,000 miles per hour. You might think this is fast due to your current level of knowledge based on your time on Earth, but for example, you might think of something like the B-747 aircraft, which has a max speed of around 600 miles per hour. So, in your mind, it may seem fast to be able to go around 5 times that. But in reality, that is quite slow. Even in 2010, there was a US government aircraft designated HTV-2 Falcon that was capable of going around 13,000 miles per hour. The technology here has had a lot longer to accumulate, and though it hasn't had as much time to be tested as we would like, we have progressed substantially. SFTs can travel around 50,000 miles per hour with no impact to the passengers. Assuming that the shadow is no different, all that's going to happen now between the other SFT and the gods is a simple game of cat and mouse. My other fragment has to keep the SFT just out of reach of the gods to keep them interested, while at the same time trying to calculate other variables so they don't catch up or catch on and become disinterested in the chase. In the meantime, the SFT we are traveling in is currently going near the max speed, or 50,354 miles per hour. Well, he began, intrigued by this new knowledge. I suppose I have a few more questions now. Go on, Hope chirped. Well, first, how big is this world? And second, won't they hear a sonic boom? And finally, do you think humanity has a chance against these gods that even our own gods couldn't match? Hope looked at Leon oddly. Around? The world is flat. Didn't you know? Leon looked at her stunned, one of his eyebrows raised in a mannerism that said, "You can't be serious." After a moment, Hope smiled and then just laughed. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. You see, I recently learned about Flat Earth Society and felt the need to joke to lighten the mood a bit. For a real answer, this Hell World, or Afterworld, as most have come to call it, has a circumference of 552,000 miles around. 552,784 to be exact. To help you picture this, it is roughly twice the size of the planet Jupiter in your solar system. As for your second question, the SFT was built in a way to nullify the effects of the sonic boom. Any sound or booms that would occur is otherwise nullified by a small energy disbursement from the shield system. To your most complicated question, that is something that not even I can say for sure, or begin to calculate. I would like to think that we do, as someone who was created by humanity. However, we are still in hiding. The reason for that, well, it is simple really. As of right now, we are not confident in our abilities to come out triumphant in a full-out assault or war with the gods. Take that as you will. I see, Leon said, frowning. 2 more questions. How far is this to Lotus? And what is my role in all of this? I mean, why did Ragnar and Dabriana come for me? For what reason? Salutis is roughly 76,435 miles away. At our current velocity, we'll reach the territory in about 1 hour and 31 minutes. As for why you were chosen, well, I know the answer to that. It is not something I can disclose to you as it contains highly classified information. With you not being an official citizen, along with everyone else here who could potentially hear our conversation, I cannot disclose this to you.
This ended up creating more questions for Leon, but at least it gave him some idea as to what was going on. It wasn't a pure whim that they had come to save him. There was at least a purpose behind his rescue, and the unfortunate deaths of so many others.
Ragnar, we have a problem,
Hope said abruptly.
The two gods have begun to attack the other SFT in unison, with less than a second interval between the two attacks. As soon as I dodge an attack, the other god aims for where I'm dodging. It is too fast in terms of maneuverability for the aircraft to avoid. What about the shields and weapons? The shields won't last much longer, even as I've diverted as much power as I can to it. And since we've had the SFT move at a slower pace, the weapons are turning out to be ineffective against the shadow. I've tried to target the gorilla bat, but the shadow just ends up covering for it. He has essentially masked the gorilla bat's body within his own. He is being worn by the gorilla bat like some synthetic armor. On top of that, the speed they're displaying is now much greater than expected. Damn it, how much time can we realistically stall for without giving away our game of cat and mouse? I would say about 2 minutes, maybe a little less before they break the shield. It won't be much longer after that until they...
Hope paused for a few seconds.
What is it, Hope? I apologize, sir. It seems the shields have been breached.
Part 7. As the gorilla bat tumbled down the hill, all that it could think of were the multiple ways it would torment the girl in the bloodied cloak. It screeched furiously as it flew up in its pursuit of the SFT, alongside the Shadow God. It beamed towards the SFT and caught up with her and the Shadow in less than a minute. Once they were both within a few meters of the SFT, they began to attack. While slightly difficult, Hope was initially able to dodge, while at the same time sending ion energy blasts back towards the Shadow. The Shadow moaned in annoyance rather than in pain, and for some reason, it didn't seem to suffer any adverse effects from the ion blast. Hope decided to target the gorilla bat again and got a better reaction from it. The god brought up its arms to block the blast, but was unable to maintain control. It let out a screeching cry of anger as it started spiraling toward the ground. The shadow rushed down after it, before encompassing it within its own body. Together they leaped back up beside the SFT, and that is when the synchronized attacks began. The shadow seemed to control the flight for both of them, while the gorilla bat could move freely within the shadow's malleable body. The shadow began to barrage the aircraft with beams of its own strange energy over and over. Hope was still able to keep dodging each attack with precision and no wasted movement, but then everything changed. The gorilla bat started to unwrap the hooked chain from around its torso and slung the chain with ease into the side of the SFT's shields. This was just after Hope had dodged the energy blast from the shadow. The force of the god's attack shook the aircraft in its entirety and nearly threw it off balance, but the shields managed to hold. Hope returned fire, but it turned out to be a trivial attempt. There was no effect on either of them now due to the mysterious properties of the shadow. Blasts from the shadow came and were narrowly avoided in time. The gorilla bat was able to hit the SFT again, causing great strain upon the shields. However, this time, in an instant, the shadow transferred itself from the other god and onto the shield of the SFT via the massive chain. It held the chain in place and nullified the shield in its entirety in the section where it was. This allowed the gorilla bat to gain momentum as it dove at full speed at the SFT, while the shadow gave it an additional boost by reeling the chain up within its own body. There was a loud bang as the gorilla bat flew through the shadow and shredded through the hole. It was now in the interior of the SFT. The shadow crept inside after the gorilla bat, and it moaned once more. As sparks and dust settled through the interior, a smile was seen upon the gorilla bat's face. It was ready to now enact its revenge upon the girl in the cloak. The two gods were now glaring at Hope, now only a short distance away from her within the aircraft.
I'll make you a deal.
the gorilla bat told its glutinous brother.
Let me defile this useless human how I see fit, and you can consume her soul.
Food! The shadow moaned.
Yes, you can eat her, but her death is for me to perform.
Hope stood up and looked at them directly. They were both within 15 feet of her, about midway through the cabin. The gorilla bat's eyes gleamed with anticipation of what it had foreseen to soon happen. It smiled again. Its thick, meaty tongue slid across its yellow, daggered teeth. Its smile and the look in its eyes gave the feeling of a mental patient about to snap off at any moment.
Well, well, you pathetic little human fuck. I was going to leave you be and deal with Dabriana, but no. You couldn't just leave things be and escape on your own. You may have even been able to evade my brother alone, but you had to shoot me, didn't you? You pathetic creatures disgust me. You will now die slowly. I will slice you little by little. I will make it last. I will make you scream before we are done. You have disrespected me for the last time. After I'm done and you're completely broken, and as you're about to die, that is when my brother will consume you. While you are still living, you will have to go through the horrible, excruciating pain of having your whole body twisted and turned inside of him. Your soul will be sucked dry from your pathetic shell, and nothing will be there to dim the pain. You will feel it all because you shot me, you stupid fucking bitch.
The gorilla bat continued to have an enamored look in its eyes as it began to approach Hope with a grave animosity. Each step forward created non-insignificant vibrations. Hope was taken aback by this display of brute hostility. She continued to play the weak, defenseless human to try and stall and get as much information as possible out of them. I'm sorry, she stuttered. Please forgive me. I was just trying to help the general. Can't you see I'm afraid? Why are you doing this to us? For what purpose? I don't even know either of you, yet you keep attacking us and trying to kill us, or force us into conditions that no one should have to live through. Why? For what purpose? The god stopped directly in front of her.
For what purpose?
It laughed while spewing upon her. Hope was able to flawlessly animate the image of her face covered in saliva in real time, as to give no indication that she was just a hologram.
Why do I, Irison, need a purpose for doing what I do with you humans? Me, a god, needing a reason? I think not. Your own pathetic gods are dead, and if there were any left, they have deserted you, which should be nothing new for you. So why do I need a reason for what I'm doing to creations with no creator? You're insignificant. Your mere existence is almost a paradox at this point.
Maybe not you specifically, Erison, but why did you invade in the first place? For what purpose?
A reason? Do you think my father needed a reason for what he does? Why would any god trust a god of another universe who is different from their own? What sense would it make for a god to be trusting of other gods? We have removed the initial threat of your gods and thus secured our own safety. Well, that was until one of you went and killed Remy. While none of us really cared for Remy, it seems likely that my father will probably be rethinking his plans for your universe due to Remy's death.
Was the reason for the invasion really nothing more than a warped view of realism's security dilemma, mixed with the desire for hegemony among universes?
Hope thought to herself, almost contentiously.
In essence, it would make sense if that were the goal. It wasn't complete obliteration of humanity or our universe, but just aggressively taking away our nukes, so to speak, in the form of aggressive removal of all guards. Between that and keeping humanity weak by the immediate removal of conquest users, theta or above, this seems to be a very plausible theory. Indeed, what would happen now that a credible threat has appeared among humans, even under the watch of the gods?
This was a question Hope didn't wish to find the answer to. Erosin had lost his patience and was ready to enact what he perceived as divine justice on this human. With an evil smirk on his face, he reached towards the defenseless Hope and closed his hand upon her neck, only for it to go through.
What in the hell is this? Is this some sort of power?
He paused for a moment, thinking to himself.
Very well. It seems I won't be able to fillet you like I was planning. But don't think you're safe. My brother has the ability to consume all matter.
Erosin looked back at its brother, who was in the back gently moaning, hungry, waiting for his brother to give the okay.
Feast upon her, and don't leave anything behind.
The shadow leapt in an instant towards Hope like a starving predator. It encompassed her, but only confusion entered the featureless being. It moaned in despair.
Yes, go on, enjoy her, you glutton.
Overhead, Hope just laughed at them.
Well, it's unfortunate I couldn't get any more information out of you before this game of cat and mouse came to a close. I thank you for what little information you did supply me with, however. It will prove to be beneficial in knowing some of the abilities of your brother. I also thank you for your name and the insights of why your universe decided to declare war on ours.
Why aren't you fucking dead?
Erosin shrieked with rage.
That's my secret, and one I don't intend to give up to you on this day. Unlike those you have given to me, I still have my doubts that this will kill you. But we've been traveling at full speed since you boarded, and at the very least, it will slow you down. That's all I needed to accomplish for today, so goodbye to you, gluttonous shadow, and to you, a gorilla bat god named Erosin.
The aircraft began to buzz with a strong ionic energy pulse.
What are you?
Erosin began to ask. The shadow was in the process of moaning once more. Before they could finish, the SFT exploded, sending out a giant shock wave into the sky. There was nothing left of the SFT but ashes, which burned as they fluttered down towards the ground. Hope had been broadcasting the conversation to the people on the SFT, including Ragnar, and to those in Salutis who had been awaiting updates.
Is it done?
Ragnar asked Hope, who was still standing next to Leon.
It's done,
Hope replied.
It's unfortunate that we had to sacrifice the ship, but if all goes well on his end, there should have been enough to allow for Dobriana to escape.
Part 8. Roughly 12 minutes had passed from when the SFT had been pursued by the Shadow and Erosin until now. In that time, a significant amount had happened to Dobriana. The most crucial part is what had still not happened. Dobriana, the second strongest fighter in the human resistance, had yet to escape and now was instead on the defensive against this odd, deformed, flat-faced god. He had so far chosen not to bring out Zimmy, and was instead trying to face him of his own strength and merits, not because he was proud, but because he didn't want to risk his only chance of escape being injured in the process. He knew he had one shot at getting away from here, and any mistake could mean his end, which in turn would be a severe wound to the humans' resistance forces. He knew this, yet he couldn't help the fact that he was tired, exhausted even. He had already spent days chasing after Leon, and quite a significant amount of time and energy fighting Remy in the process of liberating the people in his old home. Things were not looking the best for Dabriana. He panted. The rain had finally started to calm down a bit, helping his vision to be less obscured by the elements.
You don't look so good.
The god before him critiqued.
You know, if you wanted, I could allow you to sit down and rest for a bit on the simple condition that you tell me the location of your hidden encampment.
Dabriana gave him a half pant and laugh.
Well, it seems we don't really see eye to eye. Let me fix that.
The flat-faced god, who had been a few yards back, jolted at him with tremendous speed. Dabriana did all he could to avoid him by accelerating backwards. His flames helped to propel him fast like a jet engine. In the process, he swung his sword forward from left to right at the agile god. A flame shot forward, expanding along the pole path that the great longsword had cut. Even with the power of his flames giving him the extra speed to retreat, and the fire rushing towards the god, it didn't matter. Without hesitation, the flat-faced god continued to rush forward, jumping far above the tremendous fiery blast that was headed towards him. When he got to the apex of his jump, he tilted forward ever so slightly, and then, kicking its legs back, created a devastating force. This sent the flat-faced god ahead with immeasurable speed, and he was upon Dabriana instantly. Its left arm reached out in front of it, tackling him. Dabriana slammed into the ground. The air was knocked out of him, and he slid nearly 10 feet through the mud with the god on top of him. He tried as he must, but struggled to catch his breath. The flat-faced god had him pinned down with an unmeasurable strength, squeezing his throat. Its other hand reached with its slimy fingers towards Dabriana's left eye. It shoved its thumb under the eye and its index finger above it inside of the socket. It ripped the left eye from the socket just in time for Dabriana to catch his breath and let out a terrible scream. "Fuck!" He cried out while hearing the nerves break away and the blood vessels pop inside of his skull. Blood shot from the socket as the god finally pulled the eye out and stood up. It admired the eye close up.
You see? Now we see eye to eye. Or at least eyes to eye.
The flat-faced god said, smiling as it stood over him. Not paying attention to the man below, but instead admiring its newly acquired trophy, Dabriana did a backflip from the ground and propelled himself backwards, trying to gather his wits. Covered in mud and with an eye missing, he was clearly a bit shook, severely pissed off, and had more adrenaline in his system than he knew what to do with. The god opened its face and started to toss Dabriana's eye into its odd mouth, but must have changed its mind. The look of pleasure it made while staring into it was of genuine admiration. It closed its face back up as it decided not to consume it.
Don't worry. I'll keep this one right here.
He flicked a hook on his belly button, displaying the next spot for his prized trophy. He hooked it from left to right with care as not to damage the beautiful composition of the stark blue iris. Dabriana didn't play into his taunts and instead cleared his mind by taking a deep breath. A small blue flame filled his eye socket in place of his missing eye. This served to stop the bleeding and showed his determination in not giving up. Right as Dabriana was about to charge in, a strange explosion in the distance was seen. The explosion in the sky was to the left of the flat-faced god and to the right of Dabriana. A blue and purple energy disruption could be seen high overhead, and a powerful boom followed it moments later. The explosion completely eradicated all the clouds, including the giant cumulonimbus cloud stretching thousands of feet into the blue sky above them both. The god was confused as to what was going on. Dabriana, on the other hand, had an excellent idea of what it was. The moisture from the clouds fell upon them both like a white water rapids waterfall, blinding the both of them. Dabriana knew he had to act fast. His chance to escape was the best now that it would ever get.
Zimmy, no!
The dragon obeyed its master's call and came from within the necklace. It pulled him up onto its back and pushed its mighty wings down, propelling them quickly into the air. The god had no idea what was happening due to the overpowering waters that were falling upon him.
Weakly head towards our old home with the Glebgar again. We only have one chance.
Zimmy obeyed and flew towards his master's old kingdom at full speed. He made it just seconds before the overwhelming downpour had come to a sudden stop. The dragon went back in the necklace the moment they arrived at the frozen tundra that was his former home, and until recently the snow leopard's kingdom. The flat-faced god looked around, confused at what had happened, and shortly after noticed Dabriana was nowhere in sight. In the distance, all Dabriana could hear was the cursings of the infuriated god.
You think you have escaped? You think you are safe? You are not. Not one of you damn weak, pathetic creatures are. Your lives belong to us, and soon enough, you will see the consequences of your own actions, human. This, I promise you.
Looking back towards the hill, all that Dabriana could see were clear skies and a beautiful moonlight that shone throughout the lands. Ignoring the god in the distance, he carefully melted the ice and snow in front of him and entered the cave that had first brought Leon to this hellish imprisonment.